Good day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Vosh Suchit, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Cybono Discovery Center. Now, grade 12s, you are at that point where your exams are starting full on. All right. And I'm hoping that you have taken the time to settle down your nerves and get ready for the last major step into your final exams. Okay. So this one is going to give you an indication of exactly where your gaps are if it didn't happen in the June examination. All right. So here we're coming full circle and we're saying, guys, by now in term 3 at the prelim examinations, if this is your mark, this is more or less where you're going to be sitting unless you do some serious work to make it better. All right, so you at that point now, and hopefully you have done all the spade work, you've done the revision, and you're ready to write the exams. All right, so paper 3 is being written this week, and we are dealing with the final section of the paper 3, which is the transactional writing. Now, last week we dealt with the essay, which cost you 50 marks, and today we're dealing with the next 50 marks of paper 3. So you would know by now that this is 100 marks which you cannot afford to forsake in both your prelims and your final examinations. Now, the difference obviously is in how we deal with the transactional writing. And today we're going to focus on an in-depth study of the various genres of transactional writing, and we're going to look at how to approach these questions when answering it in the exam paper or in a formal exam setup, formal assessment setup. All right, but now obviously we're at the point of the examinations. So you would know that section A had 50, and now we're in section B, which is also 50 marks, and here we got to do two pieces at 180 to 200 words. So you would have given an allocation of time for yourself with section A of 80 minutes, and then you're moving into section B. Now here, grade 12s, we are saying target 35 minutes for each piece. Now you can already think to yourself, 35 minutes to do a fully fledged letter or whatever it is pretty short time if you haven't mastered the skill. So your planning already becomes a bit of a part that you need to minimize. Okay, so you sometimes, if you're the fast writer, you could do a full-on draft for us, and if you're not, then you're going to do obviously the spider diagram and give us an idea of what you are going to write about, and maybe the introduction or the conclusion included there, and then go into your final piece of work. Okay, there will be evidence of planning shown there. But if you are taught to do your full mind map and then obviously your draft and then the final, then you need to make sure you manage your time correctly during this paper. So 35 minutes to complete a full transactional, and then another 35 minutes for the second one. So in other words, 70 minutes should be your cutoff time for section B. Right, thereafter, grade 12s, you needed to understand that when you are doing the essay, there's a certain way you do it. And now with regards to the transactionals, we are saying that you are writing for what we call a purpose. In other words, there's a reason why you are writing this particular piece of work. So you are, in this instance, expecting a response from the recipient. Okay? Good. So the further point that you need to obviously be aware of is that therefore this is now why we call it a transactional. There are two people or two parties involved in this. All right. Let me just go back there, and then there you go. Right. So if you're looking at the transactional writing, what you need to firstly do is to read all the topics and basically try and recall the various genres that you have studied. If you are not aware of one or two of them, you obviously are going to be, putting yourself on the back foot, because we expect you to know all the genres, okay, or all the transactions. So Therefore, you would then be able to know that we are expecting a response, okay, from the person that we're writing to. So please write down a few ideas on each topic that you are reading in the question paper. So here we are also looking at giving you a choice of the various genres. So you have to know at least 2 to 3 of the various ones in each of the sections. All right. Please, the second point is to obviously underline or highlight all the keywords in the question given to you to ensure that you do not miss out a certain aspect that is being asked of you. So when you get the question paper, you read all of the topics, you kind of note mentally in your head where you think you might be more comfortable in terms of writing a response for that particular question, then you sort of gauge that. And once you've also worked through that process, you will then highlight the keywords and make sure that you do not miss any point that is expected of you. All right. The third step is for you to obviously then establish what is the purpose of this text. In other words, why are you writing this text? Okay, for example, if it is an interview, you want to ask yourself the question, what is the purpose of the interview? Why am I writing the interview at this particular point? What happened, okay, for me to now do an interview? Then your next thing is to take into consideration the target audience. So who is going to be the person that is going to be reading this particular piece of work? Okay? And obviously the questions dictating that to you. All right. Then you also need to take note of the register. So in other words, we're saying to you, you need to think about whether this is going to be a formal piece or an informal piece. If it's a formal piece, you're going to have to look at, does it have the correct tone in the way you are writing, or the attitude that you are using when you're writing down your pieces of information, because remember, you're addressing a particular person in that institution. All right, so you need to be aware of the tone and the audience that you are catering for. Okay. Then, crucial grade 12s is the format of your pieces of work. So what kind of format is applicable to, for example, the text you have chosen? Let's say you chose the dialogue or you chose the letter of complaint. You need to already from memory recall what the format of each of those genres are. All right. So if it's a letter to the editor, obviously you've got to be writing it in a formal way, and therefore there should be 2 addresses, for example. All right. That is the kind of things that you should be knowing about. Now, when we're talking about the transactional pieces, you would know that anything that we do in terms of paper 3 is weighted, and we mark it according to a rubric. Okay. Now, in the same way as we did the essay last week, we're looking now at the transactional pieces. And we're saying to you that please remember the difference in terms of the criteria from the essay to the transactional. With the transactional, we are looking at what are you doing with the content and planning, because that is weighted at 60% in terms of your response. So it's given a mark allocation of 15 out of 25. So it's weighted at 60%. Then with regards to your language, have you used the correct language? Okay? Emotive language, for example, or informal language to a certain extent, or formal language. The style in which you're writing. Okay, there we remember we're looking at, do you have a particular tone, a conversational tone, or very much a formal way of writing again there. Okay, and then the editing part. Did you now take what you wrote, look through it, and then matched it in terms of your content and what the question's asking you, for example? And then when you did that, then you would have been fine. You would have edited the piece where there were mistakes. Remember, grade 12s, that before you submit your final piece or your exam paper, you have all that time to edit your work. All right? So don't now edit and think, okay, you know what, I'm just going to just, or not edit, sorry, and think I'm just going to hand this piece in. You're not going to get the benefit of that. So you've got to plan properly and make sure you edit your work thoroughly to match the purpose of the text that you are working with. All right, and that is given obviously in terms of the language style and editing a 40% weighting, which equates to 10 marks. That gives us a 10 mark out of 25. All right, so that's the two descriptors we are looking for. All right, or criteria, sorry, in terms of your response that you're writing. Okay, so here I was previously referring to the genres. Now, with regards to the transactionals, we have four categories that we're dealing with. And you needed to be aware of these, obviously, prior to this lesson today, because if you weren't, you were going to be in trouble, right? But luckily, we're covering it today. So you need to ensure that when you look at the paper, you are able to answer any of the questions asked in terms of any of these genres. So with regards to category A, we're talking about your formal or your formal letter or your friendly letter, and that encompasses the letter of request, the letter of an application, letter a business letter, very much a letter of complaint, or one of sympathy or offering condolences to a friend that has lost somebody. One that is also working in terms of an informal or an informal letter to the press. That is another letter that you'll be looking at. So you'd see that very important in category A itself. We've got all the various types of letters. So when we set an exam paper, the thing is that we can't just give you all the letters, okay? We need to give you a variation between category A, B, C, and D. So you got to be able to answer any of these given to you in the question paper, all right? Then with category B, we've got the curriculum vitae, which is going to be very important for you because you are going to now after matric study, and then you're going to start applying for a vacancy, a job, right? So when you're doing that, you're going to now compile your CV, in other words, where you've got all your achievements, your personal data, your addresses, all of those things included, and then all the hobbies or the very extracurricular activities you've done, all of those things you'd cover in the curriculum vitae. And attached to that is a covering letter where you would then have to motivate why you would be the best fit for that company or institution. And over and above that, we've got the next thing, which is the obituary. So in other words, grade 12, there's only three things that can be asked in category B, which is the CV and the letter, which is combined as one, and then you've got the obituary. Okay? Then we move on to category C. And with regards to category C, we're dealing with your reports. You can have either an informal report or a formal report. You can have a review. You can have a newspaper article or a magazine article being asked of you. And then we have another combination question, which is the agenda and the minutes of the meeting. Okay, so that is also now a variation only in category C. And then we have category D, which is dealing with your formal speech, or your informal speech can also come in here, a dialogue or a written interview. So I hope it becomes very clear to you with regards to the variation from category A all the way to category D. So a question paper given to you would encompass all of these categories, and you need to choose from the categories to answer your questions. All right. Now, this you have seen before, and hopefully you have mastered by now. I'm just going to take a break for a minute, and I'm going to be with you shortly. All right, and we're back, grade 12s. We are looking at the paper 3 transactional pieces, okay? So now we've got what you have seen before, which is the writing process. Now, this has to be part of you as a person going into the actual world after matric. You have to firstly plan in terms of what you want to say to people and what you want the audience to get from what you are doing. All right. So here we're saying, please brainstorm your ideas where you're going to use keywords and mind maps. So the keywords are coming from the question that's given to you. And then your mind map is showing us the various ideas that you are going to talk about in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, for example. All right? So it's the pre-writing phase. Then you move on to step 2, which is the draft phase. Now, here we are saying take your key words or your key ideas and your mind map and use that to create a story. Okay, so you kind of write out a draft that you are going to be working with. So when I say you have a mind map, you have paragraph 1 introduction and paragraph 4, for example, or 5 would be a conclusion, and then the paragraphs in between would have 3 or 4 ideas that you're going to be talking about, which would then be paragraph 2, 3, 4 main ideas. Okay, so once you've done that, you are drafting in step 2. Then in step 3, you are now looking at the draft you have compiled and you are checking if it actually states what you wanted it to state. So here we get to chop and change the ideas we have. We can remove some, we can include some more if we want to, or we can then just choose at this time to even change the topic altogether if we don't like it. But remember, when you're doing this, you are already kind of certain that this is where you're going. Imagine now after spending 20 minutes, you realize, hold on, I don't like this topic. It is a problem, which means you're going to rush the process and then go and start another one and have limited time. So make sure that you work accordingly with the time allocated. Then we've got step 4, which is the editing part. And here you're checking that the language you've used, the spelling that you have of words, for example, is correct. All right. Remember, you have errors here in terms of words that actually sound the same, but they are spelled differently. So you need to be aware of those things. Okay. And it even goes further on to where they have different meanings altogether. All right. So you've got to take note of all of your conventions in terms of language. And then looking at your sentence construction, we are saying to you, please, grade 12s, full ideas, full sentences must be used. You cannot have a point form of what you want to say in the particular genre that you have chosen. All right. And then step 5 is dealing with, the publishing part, which is where you then construct your final piece and then submit that for marking. All right, so let's go on to the first genre or category of formal letters. So here you need to understand that although we have different requirements for the writer, the following is applicable to the majority of them, if not all. All right, and that is basically the following. The purpose. Oopsie daisy, I'm having a gremlin. Right. So the purpose, for example, could be to apply for a job. It could be to give your views on an issue or concern that you have. It could be to complain. It could be to request information, for example, from a person of authority. Or it could even be to express sympathy to a friend or a person who has lost somebody that he or she really cares about. So that purpose has to be established when you are working with it. All right. Then, with regards to the next part is the audience. Take note of the audience. Firstly, when you're writing to a person you may not know personally, or you know in a more formal way, example, an educator, you need to be obviously looking at the language you are using. Is the language appropriate for that particular purpose? Is my tone formal for the particular genre I'm dealing with as well? And please always be polite, because remember, you are requesting or you're complaining or you want something and you'd like them to respond favorably to you. But if you're going to be nasty, obviously the response is not going to be a good one. All right, so always be polite. And then with regards to the format, remember to include your address and the date. Very important. The address of the recipient, in other words, the person who's going to receive the letter. And then we have what we call the salutation, which is when we are becoming more formal in its setup, where we're saying, for example, dear ma'am or dear sir or dear Mr. Mokobe. Excuse me. All right. And then we've got the next part, which is when we're going to include a topic line. All right. Then further on to that, your ending or your closing is very important, and it must be formal. For example, where you'll say yours faithfully. If you're saying yours sincerely, it's obviously somebody that you have a very cordial or a familiar relationship with. All right. So that is where I've said there. For example, if you know the person on a personal level, you'll use yours sincerely. Then include the signature and the name of the sender, which is yourself. And important to look at, which is where your majority of your marks come in, is the content. It has to match the question appropriately. So the topic will tell you what your content should be about. And therefore, when you're planning the opening paragraph, include then the information that is required of you, and then thereafter work on that second, third, fourth point that you are going to now include, and make sure you organize information that syncs with paragraph 2 to paragraph 3 to paragraph 4. All right, so your central points must be included, and you organize your ideas around those central points. Okay, when you're arguing or putting across your points, please make sure it's done in a logical manner so that the person who's reading or marking can follow what you are saying. And this will then strengthen your case when you are complaining or you're disputing something or you're expressing your view. All right. Please, grade 12s, always get to the point as quickly as possible, but in the best way as possible. All right. So don't labor a point. The moment you labor a point, it means that you are going to spend a lot more words trying to say the same point that you could have said in maybe 5 or 6 words in one sentence. All right. So be careful. Keep it short and simple. All right. Then in terms of the register, please, you got to look at how the degree of formality. How formal does it have to be? Can you include maybe 1 or 2 informal words in the text? Would it be acceptable at that point? So the register is very important. All right, and therefore you also at that point checking that the way you're writing is going to be appropriate for the audience and the purpose that you have been asked to respond to. Okay. Then the letter should be clear and straightforward, concise, to the point, and logical in terms of the argument that you are laying out or the request you are making. The style becomes also crucial here, is when we're looking at the words that you have used. Okay. Are the words used appropriately? Are the sentences varied in terms of your simple, complex, and compound sentences? Did you use phrases or clauses? And if you did, have you used them appropriately? All those things become important with regards to style. But please always remember, we want simple, straightforward English. Don't become what we call verbose in what you're doing, because it's just going to show that either you know what you're talking about or you don't know what you're talking about. So the words that you're using get it to a point where it is exactly what you want to say. If you're the learner who has obviously accumulated a large amount of words over your time at school, you've got a love for languages, you have studied homonyms, synonyms, antonyms, all those things, and you're able to use them correctly, then go ahead and use them. All right? But if you're the candidate who is struggling, then just keep it in simple, direct. Do not make statements that you cannot substantiate. Don't threaten the recipient because remember, you can't physically go and carry out that threat right now. All right? So you must remain obviously less emotional in your response and avoid being very sarcastic in how you communicate with the audience. All right. Then further on, please make use of your modal verbs such as would, could, and should. It makes it a little bit more conversational. All right? More formal phrases and expressions, example, I would be grateful if you could assist or could send me, or instead of, use those kind of terms instead of please send me. So you create a cordial relationship between you and the recipient. All right? Please, when going through the formal letters, ensure that when you are completing a letter of complaint, for example, you have included a sender's address, you've included the date in which this letter has been written, okay, immediately beneath the address. Then on your left hand side then would then be the intended recipient's address, all right, and thereafter your salutation in terms of dear, or sir and madam, sir or madam, or if you know the person personally or his name, you will include it like Mr. Mukobe. All right. Thereafter, you then start with your paragraph 1, which will entail the reason for why you wrote this letter. Paragraph 2 then deals with possible causes or consequences due to the issue that you are complaining about. And then paragraph 3 would then deal with the possible resolution to the issues that you have mentioned. All right. And then paragraph that ends the letter, sorry. And then you've got your salutation, where you're then going to include your signature and obviously the last part, your surname and the initials of yourself, which is the sender. Right. But in the exam setup, you are not going to be using your name, your actual name or your surname. So you go under an alias, for example. Okay? A fictional name. Good. Right. So there's a structure for you there, or the format of you for you on how to write the formal letter versus the informal letter. Notice I have showed you your sender's address, and then obviously if you have any other information, the date immediately under that, and then on the left hand side you would then have the recipient's address, and then underneath that you'll leave a line, and there you'll go dear sir slash madam, or if you know the person's name, you would include the person's name, right? Then paragraph 1 will include your certain ideas, and then your final conclusion there, which is the last paragraph, and then your salutation to end the letter off. That's your formal piece of work, as opposed to the informal, which does not include a second address. So there's only one address there. All right. Now, important, as I said to you, you have to look at the question given to you, which will guide the content that you are working with. All right. So that's the typical layout of your letters. Now, the next one is the speech. You have done the speech as an oral before in your grade 12 year or your grade 11 year. Now we're looking at the actual written piece of work. So it's a written account of what you would be saying in your speech. So you have a specific purpose in mind, and here again, the topic will guide you on what content we want for that particular speech. So here when we're writing the speech, we're thinking about certain things before we actually start. For example, what style are you going to use? Are you going to start off with a joke, for example, or you're going to have a serious point of introduction to start? That kind of thing will be dictated by the intended audience that you are focusing on. All right? Then the purpose for that particular speech will then be highlighted in the question, and then you're going to look at what is the reason for that occasion. All right? And thereafter, you are trying to gauge whether your speech is actually good or not. So if it's holding the attention of the marker, he or she would continue reading from introduction going on. And that is what you want at the end of the day. So there must be a paragraph form. The tone might be formal or informal, depending on the audience. All right? And then the opening or the greeting has to be kept simple and brief to the point. Outline the subject of the speech in the paragraphs that follow, and make sure that you're highlighting at least 3 or 4 ideas that are linked to the topic, okay, that you want to explore in each of those paragraphs. Cool. And then you have the conclusion, where you then going to have a logical and appropriate closure to your speech. Don't let it just hang there in the air, because it doesn't really leave much for the audience to think about. Okay. Then we've got the speech. The speech checklist for you is to obviously make sure that you've got your audience in mind all the time. Your style in which you're writing, looking at whether it's humorous, serious, or formal. You are talking in terms of, or looking at in terms of the purpose of the occasion, and thereafter making sure that you have paragraph form of your speech, and it's not just from one point all the way through without breaks in between. Don't do that. And that you've discussed at least 3 or 4 ideas in each of the paragraphs. And furthermore, that you've had a logical and appropriate closure for your speech. All right, so grade 12s, you got to make sure that you are clear in what you are saying at all times. And that will come out in the way in which you're using the language. So the words that you're using, it will dictate whether you know exactly what you're talking about or not. So be aware of the language you're using. All right. Then we come to the next one, which is the dialogue and the interview. So now, grade 12s, you need to obviously establish what's the difference between the dialogue and the interview. And if you look at a dialogue, it is basically the direct conversation between the 2 parties. All right? You can take 2 or you can take more than 2 people. So it's a record of the exchange, the ideas exchanged between the 2 people at that particular point. All right? So be aware of that. The interview is similar to the dialogue. The only difference here, or the major difference, is that there's one speaker who is then asking questions to the next speaker. All right? So that is the difference there between the dialogue and the interview. So in a conversation, 2 or more people can participate and share equally in the process. In an interview, 2 or more people participate, but one person's main goal is to get information from the other. All right, so please, when you are dealing with this, try not to go more than 2 characters that has been spoken or being dealt with. If you're going to go to more of the characters, you can get very much confused between who is speaking, because then you don't know, should this one speak more than the other, or this one should be the focus. It gets a bit muddled up. So if you stick to 2 people having that dialogue, that conversation, or the interview part, then it's a bit easier to deal with. Again, grade 12s, this will be dictated by the question given to you. And you may then ensure that the content that you're writing is matching the question asked. All right, so the dialogue is written in such a way that it appears to be a spontaneous and natural flowing conversation. So here you place yourself in the position of 2 imaginary characters or people, and you then obviously have to express the views of those 2 people in a formal setup. So keep it brief. In other words, get to the point. Because if you're spending too much of time, it begins to start to feel like a boring tennis match where he serves, but the next one hits the ball, it comes back, he then defends, he hits the ball again, and it carries on back and forth. All right, so it becomes quite boring in essence. So please try and make sure that there's a clever switch between the two people that are speaking to each other. Avoid the small talk because that's not going to capture the attention of the person that's reading or marking. Give your characters a unique way of speaking, and that's where we would say to you engage with the reader very well. So, your word choice is also very important. Okay, I'm going to take a minute again, grade 12s, and I'll be back with you shortly. All right, welcome back, grade 12s. So, when you're dealing with the interview and the dialogue of paper 3, please take note that you got to be consistent in what you are saying. So, you keep your characters as true as they can be. In other words, they must be like real life characters. All right? Make sure you are creating a sense of suspense for the reader that is going to be reading your piece of work. So, if you can, look at your piece of work and read through it. Try and in your head make sense that it of what is being said and follow it through. If you can't make sense of it yourself, it means that the reader is not going to be able to make sense of it. In an ideal situation, if you had been writing it at a point where you could, talk to yourself, for example, on a loud, uh, at a loud level, then that's different volume. But if you're not in that position during the exams, obviously you're going to read to yourself and then try and make sense of what's being said. All right. Then further on to that, you need to check that you've included on the left-hand side of your page the names of the characters that you are including. After the name of the character, you have a colon, and then that will then indicate the direct words of what that person is speaking about. Leave a line and then start with the next character and write down what he or she is saying. Right, so the new line that you are going, where you leave the line, indicates that you are having a different speaker. Please advise to characters or readers on how to speak or present the action must be given in the brackets if you are dealing with the dialogue or the interview. All right, and then that obviously also directs the reader as to what you want to do in that piece of work. All right, and then please sketch for us a scenario before you start writing. Okay, because that will then show you where you're going in terms of this dialogue or interview. Then we've got the review. Now, the review here, grade 12s, is an individual's response to something that they've watched or they've seen. So it could be that you watched a movie and you want to give us a report on that, or there's an piece of art that you've looked at and you're asked to report on that. Or it could actually be a book or an occasion that you attended, or even it could be visiting a restaurant and you're asked to review that restaurant. All right, so it is your own response, definitely. So therefore it's a formal piece that you must also take note of, and it would include, for example, the title of the movie or book if you're dealing with the book review or the film review. It will then also include, in that case, an author, the director, the producer, or the publisher's information. It will then include the brief discussion, which is then the report or the review, sorry, and that must include a setting, a characterization, in other words, a depiction of the various characters and their roles, whether it be minor or major roles. All right, and then include stylistic effects for us, please, where you are, taking us through a varied way of responding to the topic. And the style of writing or the genre is very important as well. Please, at some point during the review, you would have to include a judgment in terms of whether that book is a good read or that movie is a good one to watch, or if not. And if you decide negatively about it or positively about it, you've got to give them a recommendation on possibly where they could improve if negative response has been given, or a recommendation on saying that you have done so well so far, for example, but maybe include this. All right. So you've got to give them a recommendation in terms of how they can improve in what they are doing. All right. Good. Then further on to that, we've got the format. Please include an introduction like you always know about when writing a piece of work. So in the introduction, you're including a background information in terms of saying, this is the third installment or the third book or film in that particular franchise. And then after the introduction, you're going for your 2 to 3 paragraphs, which is the body. And here, again, you are including maybe key incidents in a book, for example, without giving away the plot. You're also then at least targeting 2 or 3 ideas, okay, or incidents. And the final paragraph would then be the conclusion, which is where you're tying up everything together and you are offering your opinion and you giving a recommendation if that is necessary. Right. You're taking note of the style, in other words, how you are writing the particular piece of work, and the tone. Should you have a formal tone or an informal tone? In other words, the attitude that you are working with. Then remember, with the review, it's very much subjective, and that is where your opinion would now be graded in terms of the marker reading and finding out, do you have a valid viewpoint or an invalid viewpoint? And then they would credit you marks for that. All right. So you have to make sure when you have done the review Again, review the question and what the question is asking you and make sure the content is matching the question. Then you check, have I included factual details like the title or the name of the place if you're doing a review of a restaurant? Have you noted the name of the author or the lead characters? That's the characterization I was talking to you about. Have you included information on the publishing company? Okay, or a record label if you're reviewing a band that is maybe, doing a production somewhere. Did you include an area where the place is situated? And did you make use of paragraphs during the piece of work? That's important, all right? Then we've got the magazine article. Now you can obviously gauge that there's quite a lot of things that you need to take note of. And so when you're reviewing or you're revising, please make sure you note down all of these things when you are preparing. All right. So the magazine article, the newspaper article is very much written to inform, persuade, or entertain the audience. So again, grade 12s, your style and tone of an article is important in terms of, are you writing for a school magazine or you writing for maybe a medical college that requires information from you. So that would obviously be very important to take note of, all right? So the way in which those two would be written would be very different, and you need to be aware of that, all right? The next part is that when you are called to write a newspaper article or magazine article, remember you are reporting on what you have seen. So if you picture that you are in a court, for example, and the evidence is being presented, you need to now note all of that evidence when you are taking consideration of what's being said. So in the same way, we are saying when you're doing the magazine article, remember you are reporting detail for detail for detail, and therefore the facts that you're giving must be done or completed in an accurate fashion. All right? And thereafter, the article again must be short and concise to the point. Don't include unnecessary detail. In essence, you want to communicate with the audience without losing their attention. All right. So you got to make sure that your heading is attractive and interesting to the audience. It should be having lively, neutral content, all right, when you're speaking to the reader. Then you may remember to include your names, your places, your times, your positions, for example, and any other necessary information that should be included in the article. And again, that is dictated by the question that is given to you. All right, divide your ideas into clear paragraphs. At least 4 paragraphs, please, must be included for that 180 to 200 word allocation. The article should then stimulate the reader to continue reading. If you say something and the reader is like, you know what is this child trying to say? You have lost them altogether. So be careful with that, okay? We must be absorbed in what you are saying. Right, so 4 or 5 questions to ask yourself. Is the article having factual views or news? Or is it a piece that is dealing with my opinion? Or is it a feature article? All right, then is the article that I've written arranged in columns? So if you're going from, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and paragraph 3, and then maybe you shift and you go paragraph 5, 6, 7, and you carry on like that, it's fine. That is how we would actually see the article in a publication. So you can do it like that in terms of the format. And then is the article arranged in the column for easier reading? Have I broken it up into subheadings, for example? And did I include short and factual pieces of work? Paragraphs, sorry. And if the person had to read my piece of work, can they scan through quickly for specific information? That's what you want to ensure that you've done with the article. All right. Then we have the obituary, which hasn't featured as often, but we used to see it quite a lot before. But again, you do not spot any of them. You need to know all of them. So the obituary is very much a notice of someone passing on. And now there's a targeted audience, obviously, here, right? So that is the target audience in terms of they know who the person is who has passed on. So it's not a foreign person to them, all right? Over and above it being formally written and announcing the death of the person formally, it also includes the cause of the person's death as well. And then inclusive of that is the funeral arrangements for uh, the departed's end result, which is being buried or cremated. So that would then be your funeral details that need to be included. It is written in the third person. Now, this is vitally important to note because you cannot kill yourself and write your obituary. It is hilarious to even think about it, okay? Although it's a sensitive topic. So it has to be written in the third person, please. All right. The eulogy is also confused with the obituary very much, but if you know exactly what you have to do with the obituary, you can't get confused with the eulogy. So the eulogy is a speech that's written about a funeral in terms of the person who has passed away. All right. So whereas the eulogy is like that, the obituary is paying tribute to someone who's passed on. It is longer than a death notice as it includes certain information about the departed. So the guideline for you to work with is, for example, my opening should include the full name of the person who has passed away, the date of birth, or even the cause of death must be included, and where the person was living at the time of his or hers death must be in the opening paragraph. In the second and third and fourth paragraph, for example, here you're going to be dealing with the biographical details of the person and his or her characteristics that showcase their achievements. So each paragraph gives a brief summary of the various points, which is, for example, the date and the place of birth, the school or the educational qualifications that the person has. And then thirdly, maybe the occupation details that he has been part of or she has been part of before they've passed on. All right? And then please always include a paragraph in terms of the achievements that the person has gotten so far, and maybe any community involvement that they have been working with or showcasing. All right. So the obituary is paying tribute to someone who has passed on, and therefore your final paragraph should include the details of the survivors. Okay. Please, we can't go and talk about 45th cousin, for example. We're talking about the immediate people. So you list the immediate people who have survived the deceased. For example, the parents, the spouse, or the siblings, as well as maybe if there's children involved there, you'd include the details of them. All right. Then you give details of the funeral. In other words, when the funeral is going to happen, where it's going to happen, all of that information, as well as possibly memorial service information. All right, which includes a date or a venue for that service. And then the last paragraph is when you include your message of condolences. Please again match the content with the question. So you will check in paragraph 1, did I include full names of the departed, where and when he or she was born? In the second paragraph, have I included schooling information of early schooling information and basically some good achievements that achievements he or she has got over the years while contributing to the community. Then the third paragraph, you would include, for example, information on the cause of death. The fourth paragraph, a message of condolence to the people who have been left behind, and then basically mention in the last paragraph who he or she has left behind. Right, then we come to the email, which has been included after a very long time in the English home language paper. So prior to this, it was not there. So now you are given the let's say the shorter piece of work to work with, and you can get some good marks. So again, grade 12s, if you are not sure about the question that is asked of you, please don't just shove content in there to try and fit the word counts. Be aware that you have to have the correct content. Okay, so this short piece of work is electronic communication that is sent from one device to another device. So in this case, it's from the sender to the recipient. So before completing this activity, you need to ensure that you go back and look at your term 1 or your term 2 booklet that Ma'am also gave you, where you have the information on how to write the email. All right, so here it's usually, if you go onto the computer and work with the emails, it will bring up the person's email address if you've saved on your computer. If not, in this case, which is now the manual way you're writing the email, you'd have to include the person's email address. And it's usually either ymail or gmail.com or outlook.com. Okay, so you'll work with that. So here's the email structure or format, and you would see that on the computer you'll have file, edit, mail, view, window, and help. Those are the icons that you can click on to get information. But more important is the following. You've included the following information, which is your sending information. Who are you sending it to? And in this case, we've got Lucy. If it's a formal email and you'd like other people to get that information, then you would CC them on that. In other words, you'll get a carbon copy of the email you have sent. Okay? And then if you really don't want them to know about everything, then you would only include that person, or you don't want other people to know about one particular person, you will then BC that person. All right. So it'll be an invisible email sent to somebody. It'll be an invisible recipient in the address line, because the people will not see that address when the email is dispatched. Okay, so that's important. And thereafter, the subject line will include maybe a line only, not more than a line, of what you want, what the subject of this particular email is. And then the content is where we now count that 180 words from where you say hello and you carry on. Okay, so again, paragraphs are important there. So the recipient is very much the person who is sending, who is receiving the particular piece of information. The carbon copy, I did say to you, is the email of the person that you'd like this info to go to, and then your message, which is then inclusive of certain details, again linked to the question that's asked. All right, so grade 12s, these are things that you need to go through. When you're dealing with the agenda and the minutes of the meeting, for example, please also go through that. That was done in depth in grade 11. All right, so you need to obviously go back and revise that, because there, remember, we talk about the agenda going out to various people who are invited for the meeting, and then the minutes of the meeting will include the actual occurrences on that particular day. All right, so that's important things to take note of. So whatever has not been covered in this lesson, it does not mean it's not important. You still got to go back and revise. All right. So when dealing with the section B, this was actual pieces of work, you need to now go back and practice proper planning of what you want to do in each of the genres that is being tested. So use your last 3 to 5 years NSC papers to work with. Now, please, the worst thing you can do is to take a pre-planned response and try and shove it in there as if it's going to match the question. It's not going to happen. So you need to be very clear in terms of what is my question asking me, and have I achieved my purpose that I have with the piece of work that I've submitted now. Did I include the appropriate language? Did I use the right words? Did I make sure that my intended audience is taken note of? All right. So you need to choose a topic that appeals to you. You need to also plan the response using your mind maps, your spider diagrams, all of those things. Keeping your target audience in mind is crucial all the time. All right. And then you finish the transactional with an intriguing conclusion. All right. And that then would then be the completed piece of work. And then you edit the writing piece thoroughly. Can I please have a minute break, and I'll be back with you shortly. All right, we're back, grade 12. Please, I just want to run through this again with you. You need to go back and make sure that you are planning precisely what you want to say, and then do that by using your past year papers. Please, when you see your essay questions or your transactional pieces, make sure you choose a topic that appeals to you and that you know content that would be appropriate for that particular piece. Plan your response using your mind maps and your diagrams. Always take cognizance of the audience that you are intending this particular response to go to. Finish the transactional with an intriguing conclusion, and then make sure you edit your piece of work thoroughly. So check it at least 3 times before you submit this to the person to mark. In other words, your chief invigilator who will take it, and then it will be marked, okay? Then in terms of the content, your own experience is appropriate, yes. But please, when you're including that, be sincere in what you are saying. Listening to the news and generally being aware of what's happening around you is very important, grade 12s, because that is more or less what you're going to be engaging with once you've done with your examinations. So please be aware of your surroundings and events taking place around you that would impact you after your matric year. All right. And obviously the country that you're living in, how it is, how it is gauged against the other countries. Please, formats of your transactionals are very important. You need to make sure that if you know you're going to be having a paper 3, that you've mastered all of the formats, okay? Because that's where your marks are being lost. And then make sure the content is matching the question that has been asked of you. Please study all your formats when dealing with the various genres. Okay, and then furthermore, please remember to draw a line through your rough work, because it doesn't make sense to leave it there and the person marks the entire draft and he comes back and realizes they've marked the draft. That's not good, okay? Please edit the draft so that it doesn't look identical to the first piece, to the neat copy that you submitted. Do not write personal comments to your markers. They are not impressed by that. It's not going to give you more marks. All right, so forget about doing that. And then further on to that, grade 12s, you need to make sure that you time yourself and you make sure that you use the time appropriately for each of the questions. Remember, 70 minutes for the introduction pieces. That's 35 minutes each at 25 and 25 marks. Please do not make the mistake of only answering one question. You have to ensure that when you submit your paper 3, you've got 3 pieces in that, which is the essay and the 2 transactionals. So we've come to the end of this lesson with regards to paper 3, and we've come to the end of the sessions with regards to the revision that you needed to take note of for your examinations. So please, before you write your paper 1, 2, and 3, ensure you have studied thoroughly, you have revised the last 3 to 5 years of papers, and you sat down and worked with them according to the time allocated. So you wrote the paper for 2 hours and you were able to then see, can you finish the paper, and then have a memo next to you and mark to see if you are making sense or not. Okay, so I want to wish you all the best for your prelim examinations, grade 12s, and please remember it's the stepping stone into the last part of grade 12s. So don't mess it up. Calm down, think clearly, ensure that you know what you want to say, and write it down appropriately in your responses. I want to wish you all the best until I see you again in term 4, where we'll be going over information on your, again, your papers for your final examinations. So until I see you then, please take care of your health, be good, and catch you then.